Thank you for the interesting speech. Our next speaker is Miki Shifman. Hope I pronounced it correct.
Cool. Okay. Right. So, hello everyone. My name is Miki Shifman. I'm CTO and co-founder at Silos. And today I'm going to talk to you about lessons learned from protecting a rail technology environment. Okay. Clicked on the wrong button, so it's a bad start. That's it. Thank you. No, just kidding. Okay. Now I start to understand it. Cool, so just quickly about myself. I have over 15 years of experience in cybersecurity. One of the things that we're doing, except for working at Silos, of course, and part of the work is participating in a lot of global cybersecurity working groups. One of them is the PT63452. Sorry, numbers are confusing here. And that's a working group currently working to establish the new cybersecurity standard for the rail industry. And there are other groups as well as part of APTA and UATP, and there are a lot of good activities going on in the industry. I'm going to get used to it at some point. The green button doesn't work. Okay. What's the direction? Show me. This one, the two green button. Okay, cool. All right, so let's start from what we're not going to talk about today, because these are things that either other people are going to talk about or they're just not part of this scope, and it's IT-OT convergence. I guess all of you know that. Different directives like NIS and NIS2, IEC 62443, TS5701, Cyber Resiliency Act, blockchain, quantum computing, and also AI is not going to be part of the scope today. So you're probably wondering what's going to be the scope of this talk. And I want to talk about practical cybersecurity lessons that we have from the industry and show how you can potentially use them. Let's start from an interesting characteristic of the railway industry. So we have a very interesting industry because most of our systems, as we heard before, are used for 30, 40 years and so. At the same time, if you look at most of the discussions around cybersecurity industry, they're talking a lot about security by design and what we're going to do in the future. We talk about TSI, OCORA, ULINX, different standards that include a lot of security practices, which are great, but they're going to be deployed probably a few years from now. Unfortunately, let's say 95%, or the big box over here, is the systems that actually transport goods and passengers. And these systems might have been deployed 15 years ago, and they run software. Not just digitized systems run software, also older systems run software. And this system is basically, those are insecure by design because no one thought about security when they built them, so this is the harsh reality. And the question is, how do we start securing those 95% of the systems, because these are the systems that are out there. And the basic idea is, let's take one of the best standards and frameworks out there. There are some very good standards and frameworks, like IEC 62443, NIST 882, TS5701. These are hundreds of pages or thousands of pages with very good security practices. But they're not so easy to apply on most of those systems. And the harsh reality is that the gap is too wide, very hard to close. If you try to apply any decent security framework on an existing system, you'll find out that your life are going to be miserable. It's going to be very hard to go requirement by requirement and understand how hard is it to implement it. And safety cases and reassurance are at every change. So even if you're trying to make yourself a little bit more secure, you're going to find out that just the safety reassurance of the system is going to make it so expensive that you're going to forget about even thinking about doing that. And you cannot just replace them, right? These are very expensive systems, so just buying the new and shiny and secure box is not going to be a solution for anything in this industry. So the question is what we can actually do, and these are the lessons I want to share. So we're going to talk today about two main things. One is visibility, the other is threat detection and response, and later on we can also talk about vulnerability management, segmentation, and compliance, and please feel free to reach out and ask me about it later on. So let's start with the step one, visibility. So there's a notion in the cybersecurity industry that says you can't protect what you can see. That's like something, it's a term that everyone uses in the industry. And one of the problems that I'm thinking about in most of the rail operators that we met is that you can't really see. Like what you can see is someone bought a system 5, 10, 15 years ago. There are lots of like boxes along the road. There are a lot of like data rooms and things like that. But effectively, if I ask anyone in any company how many assets you have connected to your network, they might have a guesstimate, but it's probably not going to fly. It's not going to be even close to what they really have. What they do have is very good spreadsheets that were written like 15 years ago or 10 years ago. There are lots of them because there are lots of systems. There is no like a spreadsheet management system, I guess. And they also have a lot of like those nice shiny architectures with a lot of like lines and boxes connected to each other. And that's something that everyone has, probably some old version of it. And these are usually have a few problems. They're partial. Even if you have spreadsheets, you don't have them for every system. And the other one is they're static. These are just images and Excel files. And the third one is they're outdated, and that's the reality. So we had a lot of cases that kind of like we entered up an environment of an operator, and they were surprised to identify that they have assets that they weren't thinking about, they had connections they weren't thinking about, that on paper, in the documentation, everything looks good. In reality, it doesn't look that good. And there are like two options. How do you really start seeing? Because we understand that you can protect what you can see. So how do you start seeing? So as a rail operator that has like thousands of kilometers of track and hundreds of trains, you have two options. One, you can go to every single cabinet and start recording and logging all the equipment that you have. That's going to take you some time. But I saw a lot of companies actually doing that. And second is that you can actually automate it. And automation is key here because we're talking about things in a very large scale. There's almost no such thing as a very small rail company. Even the smallest rail company is quite big IT organization. And you can actually automate a lot of it with some non-intrusive monitoring. That's something that we do at the company. So let me share with you a few lessons that we learned by actually like helping operators to get to this visibility. So first is you have to know the context. So if you just monitor the network as like traditionally in IT network monitoring was defined, you're going to get a lot of IP addresses and good luck with doing something about it. It's like, again, you need to go back and correlate it with something. It's not that easy to do something without it, with it. And you have to understand like quite quickly by your automation what's critical, what's not, what you're monitoring, and what do you have over there. Second thing is that you need to track specific properties for assets. So except for like the generic network properties, you also need to understand things like location, how safety critical is an equipment, things like that. You have to track those properties and you have to get an up-to-date view about it. This will later on serve you in almost every component of your cybersecurity program. And of course, we also should talk about like things like the operating systems, the software, the applications. If you want to track vulnerabilities later on, it will be key to understand what's actually running on this device and not just where the device is. You have to track changes. So the rail network is not as static as it seems. It can be because of upgrades, it can be because of maintenance activities, but there are changes in the network and you have to be able to track them. You have to know when there are maintenance activities happening and things like that. You have to know when assets are being added or removed, when they're disconnected or connected because of the right or wrong reasons. And that's important because a lot of those activities, they might look in hindsight as some cyber attack, and they might not be. On the other hand, they might be a cyber attack, so that's where you should worry. And you also need to continuously validate, correlate, and augment. So the fact that you have those spreadsheets is not a bad thing, it's just not enough. But once you start monitoring, you need to start correlating and doing it with integrations, like API integrations, with sometimes it's configuration management systems, sometimes it's just loading the spreadsheets, and sometimes it's connecting to other systems like NMS or maintenance systems. That could be helpful for you to maintain visibility over your environment. So once you have this visibility, we go to the next step, which is threat detection and response. And there are a few litmus tests I want to take about cybersecurity that also relate to the talk from Anissa earlier on and talk about and the other talks here. And these are the questions that I think that every operator should ask themselves. So first, like, do they know if they're under attack now, yes or no? Do I know if someone tries to attack me? So even if they're not succeeding, whether someone tries to do it. If someone would try hypothetically to attack me, would I even know? And who's actually responsible for telling me that it happens? And I think that one of the biases that we have in the industry, which is quite weird, we're saying that there are a lot of attacks on IT systems and ransomware and DDoS attacks. And have you thought about maybe the controls were telling us that there are attacks over there? And that might be like a good reason for the bias of why we're seeing more attacks in one area than the other. Like, how would you even see attacks if you don't track them? So what do you expect to happen? Like that a hacker, once they sign up, they will immediately like write something on the train to make sure that you know that they're there. So it's usually not the case. Like attacks take sometimes months, that hackers move laterally in the network and get access over different assets in the network, and that's something that you should catch as early as possible. And even if you know there's something happening, just knowing is not enough. Like one of the biggest challenges in this world of threat detection is how do you avoid false positives, because otherwise you stop trusting the systems. And you also need to be able to act when you know something, because just knowing that even if you have a true positive there, if you don't know what you're going to do next, then basically you're going to be in the day of doom just trying to figure out and search for answers. And some of the lessons that we learned is first that when you start operating such monitoring program or threat detection response program, you need to understand who do you want to operate it. So when you talk about rail assets, things that control your rail environment, typically you have two usual suspects. One is to monitor it from the security operations center, which is typically an IT-ish thing in most organizations. And the other thing is to monitor it from the operations control center, where that's the rail stuff are happening. And we see that some organizations take different approaches. So some do it like, they kind of like divide the monitoring of rail systems to the OCC and do the monitoring of the IT systems in the SOC. Some of them take a converged approach for the SOC. Some of them like just collaborate internally. But it's important because you cannot really monitor without knowing where you're going to monitor it. So just technology is not enough in this case. Other than that, you need to understand what you're monitoring for. So you need to kind of like plan for use cases to define your use cases. There are different ways of doing it, either with your vendors or consultants or so on, or just using frameworks like MITRE-ATT&CK or others, in which you just need to understand what do you expect to see to happen in a day of an attack and how your control is actually contributing to that. Both from the, like, you need to simulate it from the red team side, like the adversary side, and the blue team side, see that your control is actually helping you with it. The other is that you need to continuously fine-tune the detection. So one thing that is kind of like said to me as a vendor to say is that the detection and detection algorithms are not bulletproof. And effectively they vary from a network to network because some systems have a legit behavior that looks like an attack in every other system. And sometimes we see that the same operator has two systems that have different behaviors, and one of them looks like one of the devices trying to scan and hack all the others, but others just say it's your network monitoring, so that's okay. And we see different behaviors like that in different protocols that are happening. And you could say that other environments it will be not okay, but in your environment it's okay. And that's something that you continuously need to fine-tune and ensure that you know how to identify those legit behaviors from malicious behaviors. And also, like, you have other things that are happening on almost a weekly basis, like maintenance activities and other. And as a solution, you need to understand, like, when you put this solution, you need to understand that your SOC people know how to differentiate it. So, for example, in one of our customer environments, many times they do a lot of trials with things like radios, and they deploy them. And these might be, like, in other environments, like something that is malicious, but when you identify them, you need to understand whether it's your team who did it or someone else tried to actually like implement something in this environment. So now let's move to the takeaway phase from this presentation. So first, security by design is important. It's very important. That's going to serve us in the future. But unfortunately, it's not enough for now, because now we have a lot of insecure systems and we need to act with them. Second is that visibility and threat detection, in my opinion, are something that are must in our install base. That's something that we need to have. We need to understand what's happening in our environment, and we need to act upon it. And we can actually do it. Like, putting such solution doesn't force you to redesign your system. It doesn't force you to go through a lot of safety assurance. It's something that you can do and implement without interfering too much with the safety process. And once you do it, you can learn much more about the security posture that you have, and this learning will help you to further increase it as well as plan better for the future. Thank you very much.